Good evening and welcome to the Cover One Buffalo podcast. You are joining your host Greg Tompsett tonight as we kick off our season off-season positional preview. And I think a lot of people like to jump right in with the sexy positions like quarterback or wide receiver, those skill position spots. And we're no different here. We thought we'd jump in with the sexiest positions. When you talk about kickoff, you talk special teams. So obviously, we're gonna have a little bit of fun one to kind of ease into this a little bit, be able to talk about a position that actually might have a little bit more shift and change than what some people realize going into this year, but something that we're going to have a little bit of fun with here for a minute and go through. Before I jump into that, make sure you're checking out what we have going on at cover1.net. A lot of fun stuff overall, being able to kind of get through this. Eric is churning out awesome video breakdowns, all kinds of different plays, talking about different play schemes or different route combination schemes, different ways that the team has put together their strategy going forward, and talking about especially how some of the new guys might fit into things. So make sure you're checking it out. The draft guys are already diving into everything. Christian and Russell keeping themselves busy. Fernando's turning out all kinds of great articles talking about some of the new additions, where they may fit in and how that might work. But still a lot of really good stuff out there. So I know it's kind of boring during a lot of stretches of the offseason. Obviously, we've talked about the many things going on outside of football right now. So there's a lot of heavy realities out in the world. And I'm not going to get into that tonight. It's something that, is on each of our hearts. I will challenge each of you to, do what you think is right. Talk to people that you care about and try to make a difference in your community and in your world. And I trust each of you to do that in the right way. So we're going to focus on football here, give everybody a little bit of a break from the heaviness all around us and the things happening in our communities, and maybe give you something to take your mind off things for a minute. So we're going to get into that in each week over the next 10, 11 weeks here, depending on how much I break up some of the position groups. We're going to be going through each of the different positions that Brandon Beane has put together for Sean McDermott and his staff, and where they fit this year, what the future outlook of that looks like, and what we can expect in either training camp battles for a roster spot or training camp battles for a starting spot. So obviously in a group like special teams, those are one and the same. You're not going to have backups. I will talk about the potential of that for a moment here. But for the most part, it's going to be guys who are battling to make a roster spot, might fight for a practice squad spot, might battle to be one of Brandon Beane's, cut down day trade targets. And then also where we line up going into the future, whether that may be a guy coming up for a potential contract extension, whether that may be a guy who's coming up on a contract year and needs to perform to be able to get himself lined up, or who is, trying to earn the contract that he's been given, which will be part of the discussion tonight. So I'm going to ease into that a little bit from a special team standpoint because it's a little bit cleaner. So there's a few guys I'm going to reference before obviously the meat of this discussion is going to be in the kicking and punting competitions. And we do have two legitimate competitions in both of those areas. The other pieces of special teams that you're going to see around this roster. Obviously, you had some healthy additions. Reed Ferguson is in a good position. He's, one of the best long snappers in the NFL. He does a great job. He does what he's asked. He's able to consistently put the ball on the mark, and he's a active participant in the coverage units when he's snapping. So obviously a great fit there. Very happy, in a good age, athleticism, does his job, costs the right amount, can't ask for more from a long snapper. We're in good shape there. A couple other guys that were brought back. So last year we had Sonoris Perry as your token running back, but really a special teams guy. That's now Taiwan Jones. Obviously, some people might still be a little heartbroken as Taiwan Jones is also, half of that backbreaking play from Deshaun Watson in the playoff game, taking that screen the rest of the way. So obviously he has some running back value, but for the most part, he's a running back by title only, and is really a ability to play special teams and is an upgrade over Sonoris Perry. Taiwan Jones is a darn good special teams player. Lorenzo Alexander raves about him consistently. As far as Lorenzo Alexander, obviously, we'll talk as we get to the linebacker and defensive line groups, but there's a clear focus on being able to replace him in multiple different areas. No one player is going to replace a Lorenzo Alexander, who's a very unique skill set of versatility. From a special team standpoint, he's going to be replaced by Tyler Medikevich. He was brought in, and probably not far off of Taiwan Jones in that he is a linebacker. He stepped in at one point for Ryan Shazier and his tragic injury, but even the rest of that season, other linebackers really filled in that spot. He played that game and a couple other spots, but he had several years with 2% defensive snaps. The good news is he led the NFL in special teams tackles and is one of the most respected special teams players in the league. So being brought in, I don't know that we can count a lot, and we'll talk about that when we get to the linebacker preview show. But from a special team standpoint, taking a Maurice Alexander and a Sonoris Perry and replacing them with a combination of Taiwan Jones and Tyler Matakevich is an upgrade. That's going to be a positive for the Bills. A couple other spots, I think that you're going to have some people battling for a roster spot. Is Saran Neal more than just a gunner? Does Robert Foster get pushed off the roster by some of the younger guys? Can you see an Isaiah Hodgins or someone like that step in for that? I actually think a sneaky possibility is that Taiwan Jones is actually the guy who costs Robert Foster a spot, because I think it can be Taiwan Jones and Saran Neal as the two gunners, and it won't be a wide receiver. But that's pretty much Robert Foster's only path to a roster spot. In the secondary, maybe that's a tiebreaker when you get to a Dane Jackson versus an EJ Gaines, something like that. I think Jaquan Johnson and Dean Marlowe seem pretty safe, but there are some undrafted free agents coming aboard that'll push that. We'll get into that in the safety show. But from a coverage unit standpoint, I think they return pretty much every key player, and the other guys who were brought back are upgrades. So I would say there was not a sizable shift in special teams coverage units, but you're going to get the second year in Heath Farwell's group. You're going to have a very deep roster, and you brought a couple top end upgrades with Tyler Medikevich, Taiwan Jones, players like that, with a little bit more experience from some of the younger guys returning. So I think that we're in pretty good shape from that standpoint as well. Overall, the Bills' special teams units performed reasonably last year. They were above average in many different areas, had a few that they struggled, had some frustration with penalties early. Those actually subsided pretty reasonably later in the season. But overall, we're solid. I don't think it was an enormous leap forward from those who were, looking for just a huge material shift from the Danny Crossman area, but it was a shift and a positive move overall for Heath Farwell. And this year being his second year on the job, hopefully we'll see some more positives. Now let's get into the meat of the discussion here. Obviously, we're going to have two different competitions that we're going to talk about. I'm going to open up with the punter competition. We're somehow going to get back into a Corey versus Corey. For anyone who doesn't know, the Norwegian kicker that was brought over, he came out of Marshall after kicking and punting at Marshall. He was actually a better punter in college, and just kicked his final year. He came out initially as a dual threat guy, was brought on in Baltimore, and made 4 field goals in his first preseason game, and that kind of gave him maybe an unfair expectation that all of a sudden Baltimore had stumbled on this great value behind Justin Tucker, who obviously wasn't going to unseat Justin Tucker, who's easily the best kicker in the NFL. All of a sudden Minnesota traded for him, but they also signed Dan Bailey, and he lost out to there and then got claimed by the Jets without ever practicing with them. So I don't know that Corey Vedvik was put in a great position to be successful, but he missed a field goal and an extra point in a game the Bills won by 1 point against the Jets, and that certainly didn't help him. So that rolled over, and he got released. He got picked up later on for a cup of coffee with the Bengals, and then the Bills signed him at the end of the year for a futures contract. We obviously have a Cover One premium member, Per Erling, that is a enormous fan and from Norway, and obviously knows about him. He's Corey Vedvik is covered very heavily by the Norwegian media because he's an NFL player, and that's quite a novelty in that area to have a Norwegian NFL player. So all of his focus has been on punting. And I think it's interesting to see he averaged 44 yards a punt at Marshall, which is good. For a frame of reference, Corey Bajorka has averaged 47.3 yards per punt. So 44 is good, but Corey Bajorka in college was a better punter. I think that there's plenty of reason to assume that Corey Vedvik's going to push Bajorquez for the job. Let's focus now on Corey Bajorquez. So as we get into this, I'm going to share my screen here and show a little bit of information that might help bring some frame of reference to things. Um, Corey Bajorquez last year did not have an amazing season by any stretch of the imagination. He was able to, you know, I think put together an okay year. You might be surprised to know, obviously, there's been plenty of debate about the value of the grading system for PFF. They did have him as 15th, but the data and their premium stats are excellent. So it's something that I'm really a fan of, and you can see that he actually, especially qualified punters, Matt Bosher only had 9 punts. The two areas that really stood out to me was Corey Bajorquez led the NFL in hang time and led the NFL in fewest punts, again by qualified punters, fewest punts returned. So those two areas are not an accident. Those are not something that you're going to all of a sudden just happen to stumble across. That's taught and coached, and obviously a strategic direction from Sean McDermott and Heath Farwell. They don't want to risk a return ball. They want you to hang the ball up there. They want you to limit the amount of times it could be returned. He had the most, one of the most numbers of kicks out of bounds. He had one of the most numbers of touchbacks. He had, I think he broke the Bills record for most touchback or most kicks inside the 20, 42 punts inside the 20, which was second in the NFL. His, there were a lot of different areas where people remember the inconsistency, and you should. Corey Bajorquez was unacceptably inconsistent this past year, but I'm interested in that, a rookie punter, his first year going through this kind of, situation and trying to get himself into a spot where he could be a productive member of the team. I'm curious how much of that was getting used to the strategy that the Bills were asking him to do, and I'm at least open to that scenario that maybe he can work on and improve the consistency while maintaining the areas that he actually did better than I realized, and that, leading the NFL in hang time and leading the NFL in lowest percentage of kicks returned are positive things. That's mitigating risk, that you can't give up a big play when the ball's not being returned, or it's up there and they're not able to rip off a big chunk of yards. Now, he still had an unacceptable level of, net yardage and overall yardage, which again was tanked by, 15-yard punts and 22-yard punts. You simply cannot have those. He did uncork the occasional 63 and 65 yarder. The potential is there. I think a lot of people, Thon was bringing it, or Rick was bringing it up in the chat here. We need more competition. I would have liked to have seen someone brought in through the draft to be able to push him. Obviously, people wanted to see Man from Texas A&M. I was a fan of Michael Turk, which, on a side tangent, he was the first player that anyone in most football media has ever seen that went through, declared for the draft, hired an agent, went to the combine, went undrafted, and then applied for an appeal for return NCAA eligibility and was granted that eligibility and is going back to Arizona State to punt again. So, on the one side, that's just an interesting note. We've never seen that before. I actually would love to see that path happen, that if you're not drafted and you have a year of eligibility left, go back to college. That's awesome. I hope they start doing that more. On a second note, you're going to see me talk about most likely supporting Michael Turk as a draft option next year, because obviously we'll talk about the draft pick that was invested in special teams here. So I'm not overjoyed that our punting situation is Corey Vedvik versus Corey Bajorquez, but I'm also maybe I'm not as resigned to the fact that it has to be a disaster. You're talking about 2 young guys who have been inconsistent, but both have incredibly strong legs that can launch the ball into orbit, and if either of them are able to harness that, there's the possibility that we could have a really good season. There's a possibility that they could be in a good scenario and punt really well. Now, I don't know that I expect that. I don't know that that's even the most likely outcome. I would say the most likely outcome is Corey Bojorquez wins the job and has a similar season to last year where he might lead the NFL again in hang time, might lead the NFL again in lowest return percentage, might uncork another bunch of awesome punts that are long and help the team out, and also might have some really frustrating shanks off the side of his foot in potentially critical situations that drive us crazy. I hope that's not the case, but that's likely what I envision happening here. Um, Moving on to the next set is gonna be really interesting. I don't know that many of us anticipated the team going in and investing in a kicker in the draft. I think a lot of us were looking into the team potentially drafting a special teams player, and we all thought it was gonna be a punter. I talked a lot about Braden Mann, Michael Turk, and the other punters available. I don't know that I spent very much time at all talking about kickers other than my little anecdote of, seeing Tyler Bass kick at the Senior Bowl because I was shocked. Everybody knew about Hot Rod, everybody knew about Rodrigo Blankenship and the rec specs and how, just a fun story he was that people liked him coming out of Georgia. And Tyler Bass just whipped him at the Senior Bowl, constantly kicking him 10 yards farther than him, making more kicks. And it was this little scrappy looking dude, compared to other football players, looked like he snuck onto the field and wasn't actually a player, and just kept uncorking these enormous kicks. In the one stretch, watching him go 7 of 8 on the 53-yard kicks, all of them into the bleachers and good from 60 plus easily. So, it caught my attention. Heath Farwell was 10 feet in front of us. It was me, Sal Capaccio, and actually Kevin Ferguson, Reed Ferguson's dad, the three of us watching there because Reed's brother Blake was snapping for the team at the time in the Senior Bowl. So we were watching that, and it was just all of us. It was impossible not to be alarmed and get your attention that this kid was just uncorking these kicks. So I think that's exciting. What you see here is now you potentially have an incredible value with a kicker signed for the next 4 years at the, league minimum or even below, that bare minimum of even what the veteran minimum is, a 750. That could be a great value. Steven Hauschka has been, an incredible scenario for the Bills. He earned that Hausch money, nickname for a reason. But all of a sudden, if he gets beat out, you're talking about saving $2.4 million this year, 600,000 a dead cap now, 600,000 a dead cap next year because we're already past June 1st. If he gets beat out, that's not a terrible chunk of money to be able to take. Now, if you look at the situation with the kicking for Hauschka, the challenge has been where the misses come. The last 2 years, he's money inside of 40 yards. He's missed one kick, 3 of 3, 8 of 8. You're talking 11 of 11 there and 12 of 13 this past year, 7 of 10 and 40 yards and 9 of 10 this past year. But then 50 plus, 4 out of 7 and 1 out of 5. And that lack of confidence in the 50-yarder came to fruition in the playoff game. The Bills had a shot at a 49-yard field goal, late in the game, and they didn't feel confident they could send him out there in a dome to be able to make that kick. And there's nothing that Brandon Beane or Sean McDermott can say in a press conference that's going to speak as loud as those actions in that game. And being able to be in that position where you could have, gone for a playoff win and you didn't feel confident that you could take that shot with, your well-paid kicker who is there from a, that should be a guy you can lean on and is a guy you gave an extension to, and then you turn around and invest in a 6th round pick kicker who is the top rated kicker by just about, every scout out there, that speaks volumes to me. Now, I know they're not simply going to hand the job to Tyler Bass. He has to beat out Steven Hauschka. Plenty of sixth round picks get cut in the NFL. That is not a big deal to pick a guy in the sixth round and not have him make your squad or be a practice squad player or whatever Tyler Bass might end up being. But if he can match Steven Hauschka in the 50 and under, anything in that 30 and 40-yard range, if he's able to consistently match him, he doesn't even have to beat him. He just has to match him. He has to be as good, as consistent. Some of the mocked up pressure situations where they have the entire team standing around and, hey, nobody has to run gassers if the guys make the kick here, and they try to put a little bit of pressure on him just to test out the fortitude and the mental toughness of the guys. If he matches him there and is able to do those things, it's undeniable that the power in the leg, his ability to easily kick it out of the end zone anytime they want on extra point or on kickoffs, his ability to attempt any reasonable kick on the field. If they cross the 50-yard line, they're within at least the option to consider taking a long field goal, and to half situations and to game situations, they can try those crazy 65-yarders because he can get the ball there. Now, they're not going to gift wrap that to him. They're not going to give that to him just because he was a draft pick. He has to show that he has the mental toughness. And I've said on previous shows, I prefer signing veteran free agent kickers that I've seen do it before, because they have the mental toughness. It's the toughest part with drafting a kid as a kicker coming out. We've seen some of the unbelievable stories in the past. No better example than Roberto Aguayo. He was the best kicker in college history. I think he missed like one kick at Florida State and came out, Tampa Bay was crazy and took him in the second round. But even so, like, he was the best college kicker ever. He was a sure thing. He was going to be an absolute rock solid kicker, and he completely busted out of the league. And, it's just impossible to know where that mental toughness is going to line up. So I'm rooting for Tyler Bass. I think that the combination of Steven Hauschka being 35 years old and then getting into, worrying about the financial side of things where, hey, it's only $2.4 million, but it is 2.4 extra million dollars. All of a sudden now, instead of $18.5 million for Trey White, it looks like 16 million. That's still a coupon that I'm willing to take. And the fact that you get Tyler Bass on a 4-year rookie deal where he's making $700,000 a year, that's just a really nice value to have. And that, I think he was rated universally highly for a reason, and the opportunity to be, that kind of positive impact of what he can be. So I'm hoping that that's the case. I like Steven Hauschka. I think he's been a good influence on this team. I think he's a positive locker room contributor because of those things. I think that Tyler Bass has a legitimate challenge in front of him to unseat him, but I think he has the leg to do it. And I think that McDermott showed his cards in the playoff game when he didn't send him out there for that 49-yarder, and then Bean doubled down on that when he spent a draft pick on a player. And he has said that the late run pick guys are no guarantee to make the roster, but are at least guys who have a shot to make the roster. And you don't draft a guy to have a shot to make the roster in the 6th round unless you have a question about your current kicker. So both Brandon Bean and Sean McDermott showed it through their actions that he's a guy that you're not 100% confident in anymore. And, if you look at the history, Steven Hauschka, had a lot of stretches here where for years, 85, 83, 88, 94, 83, 93, 89, 87. You're talking about a good almost 10-year run of 83 plus and many in the 90% range of making your kicks. In this stretch here, from his last 2 years in Seattle and his first year in Buffalo, he set the NFL record with 11 straight 50-yard field goals. I hate to boil it down to one simple moment, but honestly, since that cheap hit from Henry Anderson that messed up his back, he hasn't been the same. And I don't, he hasn't been put on injured reserve. He's played through it. He hasn't used it as an excuse. So it's not fair for me to say that is physically impacting him, but from a results standpoint, it's undeniable. From that moment forward, he has been a different kicker. He has not been as consistent. He hasn't been able to get as much behind the ball. So, whether that physically impacted him in that standpoint, or it just happens to be a moment in time that threw him off trajectory, these last 2 years at 78% and a total of 5 out of 12 from 50 plus is simply unacceptable. Multiple missed extra points, and just isn't, you see his touchback percentage drop a little bit as well. And it's just something that they need to see more. And I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that Tyler Bass is going to be the new kicker for the Bills. I don't think it's automatic that they're going to move on from Steven Hauschka, but I think it's the more likely scenario. And my projection right now is that this next year, the Bills go into their offseason or into the season with Tyler Bass as their kicker and Corey Bojorquez back as their punter. Um, I would love to see if there is some hidden potential that we haven't seen from Corey Vedvik, and that now focusing 100% on punting, he could be more consistent, or that his presence pushes Corey Bojorquez to take that next step forward, and that he's ready to be the guy, and that his, coming into his third year here, he has a chance to really settle into that role. But we've seen multiple years of inconsistency, and I hope that we see something different here. And I know others have called for it, but maybe we do see a signing from somebody else, so some unseen Colquitt brother or something that is out there hiding somewhere to be able to get into this punting battle. So overall, I think that that's a good setup for how we're going to approach these. Obviously, some of the other positions, we have more players, we have more contract situations coming up here. We have guys who are going to be battling for things as they come aboard. I don't think there's a likely scenario where they keep multiple specialists at a spot. That, I've heard some people talk that if the combination is Hauschka making the team, maybe it's more likely that Corey Vedvik is the punter, because he technically could be the kickoff guy and could be the long field goal guy at the end of a half or end of a game. I don't think that's crazy. I guess there's some potential to that. If Steven Hauschka makes the team, I've heard some ask, could Tyler Bass make the team as a kickoff specialist? And I I don't think that's a super likely scenario, but it's possible. I think it'd be more likely they'd try to hide Bass on the practice squad, but I guess that's a possibility as well. But it's going to be a challenge there. The final spot on the special teams group is our return position. And being able to go through that challenge is really interesting. I get into a lot of debates with people on the value of having a returner. Um, I think it's like so many other debates in our culture right now. The nuance is kind of lost. It's undeniable that having a returner and a primary returner is less valuable than it used to be in the NFL. More teams do directional punting, kick the ball out of bounds, kick it high, just like the Bills directed Bojorquez to do, with high hang time and avoid punt returns. More teams kick the ball out of bounds. They've now changed a lot of the rules on the kickoff to avoid kick returns, because it's the highest percentage of injury on any single play in the NFL. They're trying to change rules there to limit that. And I think that's true. And that does limit the value of a returner. However, limiting the value isn't the same as there being no value. I also think there's an assumption that the majority of teams have offensive scrimmage players as their primary returner. Looking through kickoff and punt return, there were really like 5 or 6 teams in the NFL that had a legitimate contributing scrimmage player as their primary returner. Obviously Mecole Hardman for the Chiefs gets a lot of attention, and there are others who played a legitimate role on their offense and are the primary returner. But for 20, 25 teams in the NFL, it's a primary returner. It's an Andre Roberts. It's that kind of guy who can be a contributing backup receiver, running back, or whatever it may be. But for the most part, they're a returner, and that's their job. When it comes to that, Andre Roberts is really good at it. He has incredible judgment on when to go for the ball, when to aggressively take it and get forward. He doesn't lose time and yardage going laterally and running sideline to sideline. He gets the ball, he heads up field, he maximizes yards, he catches the ball confidently, he gets under the ball and doesn't let it bounce. That's what has driven me crazy when we have other guys, and have people like Isaiah McKenzie or Ray McLeod and others back there, is a lack of confidence. They let the ball hit, you lose 15 yards on the bounce, and all of a sudden now the 50-yard punt became a 65-yarder. The reason that I think Andre Roberts is likely to make this roster, and Creasby is asking about it here in the chat, is the Bills didn't bring in anyone with any return experience. I think Stephon Diggs obviously has phenomenal hands. He's never been a primary returner in any capacity. Maybe 1 year at Maryland in college. He has not done that consistently in the NFL. They're simply in neither of the drafted guys, Gabriel Davis and Isaiah Hodgins, are not returners. I've seen some people talk about it that if guys like Robert Foster or Isaiah McKenzie want to improve their odds of making this team, I hope they sat there with a jugs machine just catching punt after punt after punt this offseason. I would love if we could morph some of those guys and that you're able to have a gunner and a returner, or more likely Isaiah McKenzie being able to be that jet sweep gadget guy and the return guy. Tavon Austin isn't a bad roster spot when he can be that gadget guy, jet sweep guy, end around, bubble screen, and your punt returner and kick returner. That's not a bad use of his role when he can do all those things. The challenge is when they didn't put Andre Roberts in that role. I don't know that he can't, but it doesn't seem like that's his likely path any longer. Isaiah McKenzie was pretty good at that jet sweep gadget role, but he just doesn't have consistent hands. When they put him back there, he muffs kicks, he double catches kicks, and then that hurts his confidence. So then on the next one, he doesn't get under it confidently enough and he lets it bounce. I would love if Isaiah McKenzie comes forward this year and puts himself into a position where he can be that guy and he can unseat Andre Roberts. If that doesn't happen, I think that has to be a bigger than maybe acknowledged need going into next year, is having a receiver that can be that return guy. You're maybe a KJ Hamler type next year in the second round. All of a sudden, that's a better value than what we realize because it allows for more. The other name that comes up in this that I always joke a little bit, but there's a piece of me in the back of my mind that thinks there's a non-zero chance, is Christian Wade. Christian Wade, if you watch his highlights from overseas and you watch him play rugby, by far the most logical spot to see him fit into the NFL is the open field setup of a kick return and a punt return. That it just seems like it would translate so naturally from what that skill set was. We saw what he did in the preseason last year on some of those open runs and open screen plays where he got the ball and just ran to space. And I I don't think it's likely that a grown man who had never played American football can all of a sudden grasp the intricacies of it starting at 27, 28 years old and get to the point to be an NFL roster player at a skill position. I get it sometimes with offensive line, with defensive line, where the physical ability can simply be overwhelming. The nuance and technique that gets into the skill position players is really tough to just all of a sudden learn. The innate instincts that go into being a running back. So I don't know that I ever see Christian Wade being a scrimmage player and a guy that you can put in a game to trust to pick up a last second blitz pickup and save Josh Allen from getting crushed. I just don't know that I see that. But I think there's a non-zero chance that he's a world-class athlete. He's incredibly fast. He's probably, a lot of people projected watching his highlights, watching everything. He's probably a low 4.4 guy at his peak, from a 40-yard dash if he was going to the combine when he was, coming out of the league. He's the kind of guy that if he can harness that with that ability to run to space that is so natural in rugby, there's a chance that he could unseat Andre Roberts. Again, I don't love the idea of having a separate guy who's a returner and a separate guy who's really only a gadget jet sweep guy on offense. So, it drives me a little bit nuts that our sixth and seventh receiver would need to be both Isaiah McKenzie and Andre Roberts, or that we maybe cut and risk trying to hide in a practice squad a guy as talented as I think Isaiah Hodgins is. Um, so it's something that I don't love that idea. Matt in the chat here is asking how fast Diggs is. I think Diggs was like a 4.49, 4.52, that kind of about 4.47, somewhere in that, like upper 4.4s, lower 4.5s. I don't think Stephon Diggs' question is, could he be a returner? It's that he's our $70 million number one wide receiver. I don't want him returning kicks, and I feel fairly confident Sean McDermott feels the same way, that they don't want him back there doing that just because he's so valuable to the offense. So I don't think it's a matter of Stephon Diggs not being able to, and I wouldn't even hate it if they use him like the Eagles used to use Deshaun Jackson, where he's not the primary returner, but if you're in a critical, like, game-breaking situation, that maybe you throw Stephon Diggs back there late in the fourth quarter for a big play. Micah Hyde is another guy that Creasby brought up. Micah Hyde has incredibly secure hands. So when you're in a situation where you just need to fair catch the ball and you just want to, hey, just make sure we got a guy with good hands who's going to catch the ball and take a knee, you can put him back there. He's also incredibly valuable to the defense. So I don't want to get in a position where our only option is to fair catch it and you don't want your guy returning the ball. And I don't want Micah Hyde returning the ball and getting tackled. So I think he's in a similar situation as Stephon Diggs, where they're just both of them are too valuable to be able to put back there, even though both of them have great hands, both of them are good athletes. You want your fourth or fifth receiver, you want your Mecole Hardman with the Chiefs. When you have, Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce and a cadre of running backs, and even Sammy Watkins as a third or fourth receiver, and Demarcus Robinson, it's nice that you can throw Mecole Hardman back there and not really have to worry about it. I don't think they would throw Tyreek Hill back there, and everyone can acknowledge Tyreek Hill would probably be the best returner in the NFL. They choose not to do that for good reason, because he's too valuable to the offense. So I think it's the same logic as Stephon Diggs and Micah Hyde. They might be able to do that. We don't want them back there to be able to do that. It's a risky position. And Andre Roberts has obviously made multiple Pro Bowls, was an All-Pro the year before he came to Buffalo, made the Pro Bowl as a returner in Buffalo, and has gone down that path to be able to do that. So it's something that I I'm curious to be able to see where it goes, but my guess is, regardless of how many fans are going to be frustrated with it or not like it, I think Andre Roberts is darn close to a roster lock, because I don't see Christian Wade making that leap. I don't know that Isaiah McKenzie can't do it. I'm nervous that he's going to have enough scenarios to show that he's capable of being trusted in game scenarios and in doing those things, to the point where they feel comfortable. Yes, you're right. We can cut Andre Roberts because Isaiah McKenzie's for sure our guy. So my guess is that Andre Roberts makes it as the sixth receiver. Isaiah McKenzie is right there on the bubble for that 53rd guy, depending on whether they can afford to keep a seventh wide receiver or a ninth defensive lineman or a seventh linebacker or a sixth corner or a fifth safety or one of those kind of spots, or a ninth offensive lineman. He's going to be right there battling, though. He's not going to be battling receivers. He's going to be battling your Daryl Johnsons of the world. He's going to be battling your Victor Dodsons of the world. He's going to be battling your Dane Jacksons of the world for that last roster spot. Your Evan Baines and Darrell Williams of the world. So we'll get to that in each of those position previews, but that's my guess, is that I would love to see Isaiah McKenzie have had a really focused offseason of catching punts and being that guy. I would love to see him then make that 6th wide receiver spot where he could be the gadget guy and be able to do that. My guess is the 2 drafted receivers make it. Andre Roberts makes it as a returner, and that Isaiah McKenzie's the 54th guy on the outside looking in when we get to cut down day, and we're hoping we can sneak him on the practice squad. So we'll get into that more in the wide receiver breakdown. And being able to go that path. So my guess is that Andre Roberts is going to be right up there with Trent Murphy and Lee Smith and Patrick DeMarco and the guys that I get the most complaints about trying to figure out why they're on the roster and why we can't find something more creative. But you know, I'm assuming that that's going to be the case, and that I do think that Andre Roberts makes this roster as our primary returner, and that he's going to have another good season, and that he's going to be a backup player as needed as a receiver, and likely not play a ton to be able to do that. So we'll see where that goes, unless a guy like a Robert Foster or an Isaiah McKenzie or a Christian Wade makes some unseen leap forward as a returner. That's my guess, is that our primary return guys being able to focus on, things going forward. Obviously, Reed Ferguson is the lock. My guess is that Corey Bojorquez holds off Corey Vedvik, despite giving me laser eyes right now. My guess is Tyler Bass beats out Steven Hauschka. And my guess is that Andre Roberts maintains his role as the primary return man. And I think Isaiah McKenzie is the only realistic path to replacing him there. So I think Corey Vedvik, Steven Hauschka, and Isaiah McKenzie have a legitimate shot and are going to be some of the fun parts of the training camp and off season, depending on how much of that we get to see so far. But we'll see where that goes. So really appreciate it, guys. There's been a lot of really good discussion from everything here, and being able to appreciate the things going on. I got some compliments here in the chat, and Belo's calling out Richard for saying nice things to me. I appreciate it. It's fun to be able to get our minds off the heaviness of the world and the very significant realities going on all around us. Again, I want this to be a moment of escapism for you. It certainly is for me. It was nice to think about football just for a clean hour here, and being able to go through there and think about nothing else. So I'm not going to get into all the other realities here, but I am going to challenge each of you to do something in your life that you think is right, something a little out of your comfort zone, something, talking to someone you normally wouldn't, doing something you normally wouldn't, and being able to be open to new ideas and other people's perspectives. I'm hopeful for that on all sides of all discussions, that we need to be more open to listening to people we normally don't talk with. So I challenge each of you to do that, is to find somebody at work, at your place of worship, at your place of social interaction, someone in your family that you normally don't talk with, or spend a lot of time with that kind of discussion, and to take a minute and ask them how they've been feeling about what they've been seeing the last couple of weeks here, and have a frank, maybe difficult discussion about where you see things going. So appreciate everybody spending some time with me here tonight. We're going to do one of these each week going forward to get you through the summer until we get back to training camp. I'm going to try to alternate offense and defense. So I haven't decided if I'm going to do, quarterback and D line next, or maybe we go the other direction on the roster and go either D back or offensive line here. But I'm going to line out a calendar coming out over here the next 10-11 weeks. We're also going to bring on some experts here. Obviously, I dove into the special teams one here on my own, but we're going to have some guys who are specialists in offensive line play, wide receiver play, quarterbacks, running backs, defensive line. We've got some good connections between Eric and I throughout the scouting and coaching community to be able to bring some people on here who are going to be able to bring some additional knowledge to the discussions that we're going over here. So looking forward to being able to get through there. Appreciate everybody talking with me tonight. It's been a lot of fun. We're going to be able to go through here and wrap things up here, but you have been listening to Cover One Buffalo, and we are out.